I don't know if I have a favorite Bible verse, but there are several verses that I hold on to help me navigate through life or navigate, especially through difficult aspects of life. One of them comes from a part of the reading that you had this week from Mark chapter 9. It's when a father approaches Jesus about the healing of a son and begins to question, well, if you can heal him. And Jesus says, if I can, all things are possible to him who believes. And immediately the boy's father cried out and said, I do believe. Help my unbelief. And that verse, I do believe, help my unbelief, is one of those verses I hang on to because I think it's a great picture of what our faith and living out our faith actually is. Let me read for you a section from this week's readings. It's Peter's confession of Christ. And I want you to pay attention to the number of questions versus the number of statements from Jesus. Jesus went out along with the disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he questioned his disciples, saying to them, question, who do people say that I am? And the disciples told him, saying, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others say one of the prophets. And he continued by questioning them, who do you say that I am? Peter answered and said to him, you are the Christ. And he warned them not to tell anyone about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus. But turning around and seeing his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you're not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's. Pretty clear statement. Here's another clear statement. He summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. And then 2 questions. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And then this closing statement, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes into the glory of his Father with the holy angels. As you read this week, it's a good idea, maybe even if you want to keep a tally to the side, how many questions does Jesus have versus how many statements does Jesus make? And you'll see in this pattern with the disciples, Jesus is not only repeating sometimes what he's saying, but his very actions. We see feeding of several thousand multiple times, and Jesus is very clear. You disciples are supposed to have learned a lesson here. From the questions that Jesus has, also as we begin the reading, it's as if he's thinking out loud to see how the disciples will respond. Well, sometimes we want Jesus to say, well, here are all the answers, and this is how this works. And you'll discover within his own miracles, I mean, can you explain why he's spitting in people's faces, or why sometimes the healing gradually happens and then it's clear, or why demons respond to him the way that they do, or why he tells people to go share the good news or don't go share the good news? This matter of faith that we have is often a matter of wrestling with questions. And we think if we just had that plain description of what's happening, we'd have it all right. Well, the scripture tells us that's not exactly the case, because he's telling Peter very plainly. And so what does Peter do when he gets that plain information? Jesus, it's not going to be this way. And he says, get behind me, Satan. We're to struggle with some of the questions, because the truth is we also struggle with the plain facts. What do we do with that? Well, we hold on to a verse like we see in Mark chapter 9. I do believe. Help my unbelief. Even the Christian will have times in which he struggles with unbelief, times in which she's not sure what's being said in the text. That's okay. Keep reading.